I'm going to bring you a game from the last round of the European Individual Championship. And yes, it is another King's Indian Defence. Don't know what's come over me. So this is between Constantin Lupulescu from Romania and Alexander Donchenko from Germany. He's 24, Donchenko, 24 years old, rising star in German chess, or he's risen, playing very well at the moment. So both players had 7 points going into the final round, so just a bit under the leaders, but you know, a win could get either of them a decent prize. Now, what line is White playing? If the bishop comes to g5, that's the Averbach variation, but here White played bishop e3, and this is a very trendy line at the moment. So you notice that White is delaying developing the king's knight. So why is that? Well, it means that this bishop still has influence over these squares, so it might be possible to advance with g4 and h4 and so on to get this traditional kingside attack that we just saw actually in Ivanchuk's game, except that started with h3 and g4. There are pros and cons to all these systems, but in principle it's about advancing on the king side. So black has a choice. Do you play for c5, e5, or go for something else? Knight c6 played by Donchenko. He goes for something else. Now, this involves a threat because black, with the knight on g1, black is ready for e5, and after d5, that knight can hop into d4. And, you know, that's serious, actually. You know, this will give black a very decent position. So, in other words, White has to react here. And so White is duly provoked with d5. But, you know, this knight gets pushed around. It's a very tricky position. Black doesn't have a pawn in the middle and invites White to launch forward. It's really dangerous for both sides. So the knight is attacked and it leaps on. Knight g4 hitting the bishop, which goes back to c1. Now White wants to play h3 and push the knight back to h6 and then go g4. You know, that is that's nasty potentially. So what does black do? Well, black obviously needs counterplay. So the knight came back to h6. Now that's a very interesting move actually. So Donchenko voluntarily puts the knight back. So g4 not possible at the moment. So what does White do? Well, if h3, then it's possible to play e6, and this is actually quite serious counterplay. Black can take and get a rook to the e file. So obviously in that position, e6 just wasn't possible because White would be able to take the knight. So that's partly the motivation for playing knight h6. He's ready potentially to break with e6 if White launches forward on the king side. But White played more prudently with knight f3, but I don't know, maybe it's too late for prudence here. And I really like Donchenko's next move. You could go e6 here, but instead he goes c6, which is a really tricky move. And just have a think here. If you were playing White, how would you try to cope with this position? You know, how are you going to try and consolidate this massive pawn front? Problem with this great pawn advance is that it leaves lots of squares behind it very weak. You notice this diagonal, this diagonal. But then again, you know, what's that knight doing on h6? It's a very difficult position. Okay, let me show you a couple of obvious moves. Now I should say that a4 was played here. a4 was the game continuation. But for example, if castles, let's play the most obvious move. Black would take, let's say c takes, and now a great strike, b5. Threatening b4, and then you can take here, and if that's taken, Then tactics, of course, with the king open, queen b6 check, picks up the bishop, and then that bishop on g7 is beautiful. Okay, so the natural move castles isn't very good. Okay, what about playing bishop e3 to close that diagonal? Well, then that bishop gets attacked. Knight h5 is very tricky. Okay, so that's why white played a4. It's partly directed against queen b6. You might be able to push the queen away. It's also directed against that exchange and b5 as well. So, for example, queen b6, actually the queen ends up in trouble. I mean, even this is incredibly sharp after this. But actually, this is a forced sequence. Attack the knight, which has to move. Knight e4 hits the queen, defends f2. And now the queen is trapped. There we go. That's the calculation that I'm sure white had made before playing a4. He was concerned about queen b6, there's no doubt. That's why a4 was played. Doesn't do much for development though, does it? C takes d5, good move. And now e takes d5 played. That looks safer to me with this idea. But still, I mean, black gets pretty reasonable play here. Rook c8. I like black. The knight on h6 is a bit odd, but all the rest of black's pieces are beautiful, and d5 could be coming soon to bring that knight back into the game. Anyway, e takes d5 played. And the knight arrives back into the game, and you know this looks very nice. a5 to stop queen b6. He's desperate to cover those dark squares, but now e6. So basically, Donchenko is starting the middle game, while white has yet to castle. So takes, bishop takes. And if castles, then let me see. Well, lots of nice moves. I mean, could just play d5 to bust things open. But Lupulescu plays knight g5. This is really pushing it. I mean, it's possible to play bishop d7 to c6. But rook e8 is a very simple idea. Just let white take here. But actually this really speeds up black's development. Have a look at this, rook e8. I mean, the coordination in black's army is incredible. All black's pieces playing well. And if we look at white's position, it's hard to get these in the game. The rooks are split. And look at those weaknesses on the e-file. Dreadful. Yeah, let me just go back a couple of moves actually. In this position, you can see it's like, you know, the pawn front has been broken down, and white is just left with the support. It's, you know, they're like the columns of a building where the columns are still standing, but the roof has been blown off, and that means it is pretty drafty. And these squares, and also look at those pawns. They just block the bishops. If white could cheat and put both pawns back, then white would be absolutely fine. But positionally, that's really bad. Right, let me go forward again. So we left the position here. Beautiful position for black. And I like the way that Donchenko just builds up quite gradually. h5. It's very nice. And now knight g4. So this is starting to look really threatening. The knight's looking at e3. There's also potential for the knight to come in here. Let me just show you one line. Now, I should say that Lupulescu took on g4 here. But let me just show you this line. Knight d5. This is very sweet. Hits the queen. The queen comes up, threatening knight f2. Exchange of bishop for knight. Okay, let's say that white wants to get rid of this queen. Fine. Queen d4. Got to exchange. The rook is hanging in the corner, so rook b1. And now Beautiful finish for black. This didn't happen, but just got to show this anyway. Knight g3 and king g7, followed by rook h8 and mate. Beautiful stuff. So I repeat, that did not happen. Some of you get a bit confused. You tell me in the comments, so I'm just going to be absolutely plain. This did happen. Here we go. Pawn takes. Look at those wonderful pieces. Bishop d2. Okay, white is trying to coordinate. Black's next move. Here we go. Queen d8. What a great bounce. The queen just heads for the king side. And once again, there's trouble on the h-file. This is a beautiful position for black. Very soon something nasty is going to happen. Bishop c3. Rook e2. Black's forces are closing in for the kill. Bishop takes. Now, however white recaptures here, it's fatal. Now, pawn takes was played in the game. Let me just show you very quickly what happens with the others. Queen takes allows a swift mate. And queen takes h2. Knight takes allows g3. Rook takes. Check. King comes back. Queen h3. Threatening a mate. It's not too difficult. And now, again, this really subtle move. King g7. Allowing the rook to the h-file. And there's no defense to queen h1. Well, no good defense anyway. And you can see all these squares are covered. So black's queen cannot come across to defend. So back here. Pawn takes bishop played. King g7 again with the idea of rook h8. It's just a wonderful position. So black controls the e-file, so can switch across here, mate threatened. If that's taken, then mate isn't far off, g3, and boom on h1. So h3, that was taken. Once again, this isn't very good. And mate on g3. So queen h3, and now very nice way to win. I mean, black is winning here in various ways, but this is the best way. Queen g3. Here, white resigned. Queen threatened. And after the exchange of queens, there's no defense to rook h1 mate. Very sweet and a very efficient, simple way for black to play this game. Really interesting. So once again, the King's Indian succeeds in bamboozling someone. If you look at this game with a computer, you'd sort of think, yeah, well, come on, white's doing okay. But I tell you what, this position is incredibly difficult to control for white. Really difficult position. So, yeah, I have to say, of all the alternatives, e5 and c5 have both been tried, but I think knight c6 is looking the most uncomfortable for white at the moment, for all you King's Indian theorists out there. Now, what actually happened at the end? Well, actually, one of the reasons I'm showing you that game is that most of the top games were actually quite dull. Lots of draws, people playing very solidly to make sure they get in the prize list. Sarana and Shevchenko, who were leading by half a point, drew on the top board. So they finished with 8.5. Now they were joined by Daniel Dada from Belgium, young Belgian player who's playing extremely well. He beat Korobov. Korobov collapsed at the end. He overpressed in that final game. So 3 players on 8.5. Alexei Sarana, Kirill Shevchenko and Daniel Dada. Sarana won it on tiebreak. Hope you enjoyed my coverage of the European Championship. If you did, then please, if you'd like to support us, click on PayPal, click on Patreon, and if you're not a subscriber, click subscribe. More videos coming your way soon. Thanks for watching.